Thank you, Catherine, for the amazing introduction. And we are so excited to kick off the summit. So as Dionna is getting set up, I'll just kind of set the scene for us. So I'm really looking forward to this chat for a couple of different reasons. One, actually, when I joined PowerToFly, Dionna was in leadership, and so she was my direct manager. And so it was amazing to have a woman of color, specifically a Black woman, in the workplace to really be able to champion, set me up for success, et cetera. And so I'm really excited to kind of just talk a little bit about what some of the barriers that are faced by Black women in leadership and how can we really work towards building a better future for ourselves and others. And so just to start off with a quick stat, in the US in 2019, white women held about 32% of all management positions, while Black women held around 4%. And so this is something that we see often in the workplace where Black women find themselves affected by both sexism and racism, that intersectionality, right? And so we're really going to dive into what we've seen in our experiences, what some of the obstacles are, and how can companies and individuals really show up and support either as women of color ourselves or as allies. So I want to say, welcome, Dionna. We're so happy to have you here.
Hello, thank you, thank you. Thank you for the warm welcome. And Sienna, again, I'm super excited about having this conversation with you. I know that we have discussed many of these topics many times before, and this is a subject that we're both very passionate about. So excited to kick off this summit and happy to talk about how we dismantle the barriers for Black women in leadership.
I love it. And so I want to start us off with a question. For some individuals who might know in the audience, for some don't, what do you personally see as some of the biggest obstacles that Black women face who want to step into leadership roles?
Yeah, that's actually a great place to start. So in my both experience as a woman in leadership and one who's kind of had to, we say climb the ladder. I think sometimes for Black women, we're like clawing up the ladder, right? So from my personal experience and also in my roles, I've had the privilege to coach many women and serve as mentor for many women who are also growing in their careers. And some of the largest obstacles that I've seen, to me, the number one obstacle is lack of access to the folks that make those decisions.
Yeah.
If you are not in this circle of folks who are in talent reviews or who are speaking up about who should move into roles, if you don't have someone to vouch for you in those types of environments, or you don't have projects that allow you to work with other leaders in the organization, it is a huge disadvantage. And to me, that is the number one obstacle. It surely is not educated. We are right now, I think I just said that Black women are the most educated.
Most educated.
Out of everyone, right? So it certainly is not education. It certainly is not lack of leadership skills and grit and all of those great things. But it is about us being able to get our names in the hat for folks to know who we are. And funny, quick story, I was talking to someone the other day. I had a mentor when I was trying to go, for me, the biggest jump is kind of like from that manager to director level, right? Where you feel like you're part of senior leadership. And I had a mentor, he was a white male, and he helped me tremendously. So this is not to say he was not helpful to me, but one of his number one tips for me when we sat down for the first time about what I needed to do to grow my career, et cetera, was that I needed to take golf lessons. I'm like, so of all the things that I could do, I should take golf lessons. And I had to explain to him that no matter how many lessons I took, if I became Tigriana Woods, I wouldn't be invited to the party in the first place for them to even know that.
Yeah.
And that is where I think people don't realize you can have the skills, you can have the experience, but if you're not invited to the party, our conversation today is going to be about how do we insert ourselves into the party to make these opportunities available to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And Dionna, you're bringing up so many interesting points, right? It makes me think about like when we were younger and our parents were like, or there was a saying of like, it's not what you know, it's who you know. And I remember when I was younger thinking like, no, that can't be true. If I work hard enough, if I study hard enough, if I do all the right things, then that will open the doors. And then with time, you realize that it's like, oh, it's actually about getting in the right rooms, because when we think about it, a lot of the times the conversations are happening behind closed doors.
Yes.
And if you don't have direct access to someone who's in those rooms, like going back to the stats, 32% of all management positions are held by white women, only
Yes.
4% by Black women. And so I think this brings up a really good conversation around like allyship as well, right?
Yes,
And being able to
absolutely.
say, like, how can allies in companies champion for Black women in the workplace to be able to rise into leadership positions? I'd love to hear what you think about that.
I'm sorry, I dropped off for 1 second. What was the question?
No, it's okay. So how can allies in companies really champion for Black women in the
Yes.
workplace, you know?
And that's an excellent question, because that is where the rubber meets the road, right? So if you are, joining this call, first of all, if you are joining this summit and you are not a Black woman, like, kudos to you for understanding that you need to be a part of this conversation. And part of that is using the privilege that you have to be able to open doors for other folks. I always, I credit, Catherine. I've talked to Catherine about this a lot too. While during my time at PowerToFly, she opened doors that were not available to me. She put my name in front of folks that she knew from her personal circle that I did not know. That gave me lots of opportunities, and among many other things in my career, I think, helped me get, not I think, I know, helped me to get to where I am right now, because she used her privilege to help open doors for me. Now, when the door was open, it's on me, right? I got to show up and show out. I've got to be accountable. I've got to, these great skills and that we have or whatever, to be ready to go. But I think, so tactical things I think that allies can do. One, I think is first just, accepting the fact that you have privilege that we may not have. It's not to say anything bad with you. It doesn't mean anything, whatever. It just is what it is. It doesn't mean you've never had obstacles in your careers. It just means race wasn't one of them. That's all. you know? So use that to help invite women. So when you have stretch projects on your team, make sure you are inviting Black women to be a part of that. When you have opportunities for folks to present cross-functionally or in front of leaders, make sure you're including Black women and the folks doing that, even if they're not the most senior. Even if that's how we learn, that's how we grow. And one of the biggest things to me is talk to your manager or your boss. If you're a director, talk to your VP. If you have direct access to the C-suite, talk to the C-suite about the stuff that folks are doing. Make sure that their name, people recognize their name and they know of the great work that they're doing. And that makes it easier when it comes to talent review or performance review time and they're hearing that name again. I mean, I've literally sat in rooms where folks in the C-suite are like, wow, I keep hearing this person's name. I don't know them personally, but it sounds like they're doing some good work. What do you think about them for this, director level position? And that's how we move folks through corporate America.
I love that. And Dionna, we just got in a question from Elise. Thank you for asking. She says, how can we help leadership understand that lack of access is a real thing or issue?
Yeah, so a couple things. So, one of the things I was thrilled about when I joined my company that I'm with right now is that I didn't have to run around for a year doing presentations on the business case for diversity. I'm so over, at this point, if they don't know that there's a business case or that we need to do this. That being said, hearing the buzz and just kind of knowing we're still at a point where many leaders and many companies are just are doing this because they know it's the right thing to do, right? With everything that happened last year, there's been an increased focus on Black folks in corporate America, and in particular, Black women. A number of them have been seated on boards and are being elevated more. But it's a couple of things that I think are important. When you have an opportunity to discuss diversity or to discuss these matters with senior leadership, I think it's really important for us, especially those of you who are joining us who are DEI leaders. It's important for us to distinguish between women issues and Black women issues. I mean, the intersectionality is something else. But you know, I always say, and this is controversial. I've had some people that don't really appreciate that I say this, but for me, I've always been Black before I'm a woman because I don't have, you know, like that is, you just look at me or all of the historical and the systemic, et cetera, and that it does not mean we don't have you know, battles as women and that we're not fighting those together too. But we need to make sure that we let senior leadership know that there are additional barriers for women of color and that they're not fixed unless we're intentional about it. It doesn't happen. If you're just focused on bringing women up in the organization, it will majorly benefit white women. It's not a bad thing. I'm glad to see any woman, any sister moving up the ladder is great for all of us if they're going to serve as an ally. But the point is, when we have programs just focus on women, it helps white women. And what ends up happening is the same households, those white women are in the same households that are oftentimes not without, right? So by shutting out Black women from the women movement, then you know we have this huge opportunity to begin eating things and it just doesn't happen. So being very purposeful and calling out that there are some additional challenges for Black women, and if you as a leader know that you need to pay some extra attention, make sure there's a career path, make sure you're mentioning their name, etc.
Yeah, I love that. And like, I want to lean in because when we were talking about the racial equity gap, it's not just like making more money. It's like the white households that are making 10 times as much as Black households. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And and just like the intersectionality, when we think about that, something that's so important is that we never get to choose, you know? And I think a lot of the times it's like with DEI efforts, it's like, okay, like not checking a box because we shouldn't be checking a box, right? If we're doing it intentionally, but either saying BIPOC or women and trying to message those things. And it's never like, what about Black women or women of color specifically? So I love this. And really quickly, I'm just going to give you a quick shout out because Liana is saying Dionna is speaking the truth. Yes, people are loving it in the chat. So I love it. You were going to say something. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, you know, when we talk about, you know, households, you just brought up a really good point. And the difference between equity and what we think are making things equal, right? So like, if I'm giving equal time to the folks on my team, right, that I have is a mixture of folks. If I give equal time to everyone on my team, that's great. They're going to learn, they're going to move at a pace, etc. However, I have to know for my Black women, Black males too, but in particular for Black women, for Latino women, etc., that we're not necessarily on equal ground, you know, so I have to put in some additional time to help things even out. And so we've just got to accept that. It's not reverse discrimination. It's not holding anyone back. You know, I had an employee come talk to me not too long ago who was feeling like a lot of the programming that I have is, you know, I'm a very straightforward DEI leader, right? And so I'm very empathetic for both sides of folks, et cetera, but I'm going to do the work that needs to be done. And I had an employee who was saying that they felt that white men were being left out, you know, from the many efforts, or that after the shooting for the terrible shooting that happened in Atlanta against Asian Americans, that they were being villainized. And so I had to stop and pause and say, this is not about you at this moment. We're not going to not talk about this at work because the assailant was white. That's insane. This is about supporting your Asian American colleagues and brothers and sisters. This is a humanity issue. It's not about you know, wanting to make sure that you feel more comfortable. And I've also had to share with our white males, trust me, you'll be okay. You're not going to miss an opportunity, I promise you. And if you ever feel like you have because of this, come talk to me so that I can point out and show you the data to ensure you that that's not the case. We're doing this extra because it has not been done and because it needs to be done.
Yeah, and Dionna, you bring up a great point of like that sense or that part of being like, hey, what about me? When we think about that in society, it's like that's what we live on a daily basis, right?
It is.
And it's interesting, like as we talk about allyship, power, privilege, etc., realizing that a lot of the times we don't realize or understand the importance unless we actually experience it. And so the situation that you just explained, it's like that's a small understanding of what a lot of individuals, marginalized groups feel on a day-to-day. When asking yourselves, like I want to ask you in the room, when you look around the rooms or the Zoom rooms that you're at work, how many other people look like you? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're absolutely right. But the thing about it is that we are used to feeling this way. We're used to being the only, we're used to having to justify, I always tell people, so I went to an HBCU, I went to Howard, and we were taught to assimilate in the sense that this is what corporate is like. Love your blackness. They taught us tons of tons of confidence that I didn't have prior to this because I'd always been one of the few. But in order for things to work in corporate America, this is what it needs to look like. This is how it needs to be. This is how you have to be. If not, you make folks uncomfortable. And folks don't promote or bring people into leadership that make them uncomfortable. Like literally, that's what we were taught. And so now, with the new generation coming up, it just does my heart so. I'm so full sometimes how they're like, no, I'm brilliant. This is me. This is my hair. This is how I talk. This is the music I listen to. No, I don't want to hang out with you all, at the bar after work, but that doesn't mean that I can't do my job. And so people are becoming unapologetic about the fact that we may be different, but we've got to make sure that in the workplace, again, that we're not using our unconscious biases. And I know, Sienna, you are like a guru, like on biases and the different kinds of biases, but choosing people who are like us, because if you're in an all white, workplace, you're in an all male workplace, then it can't help but keep, repeating the same cycle. So it's on us to help break that cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think something that I just kind of want to lean into is asking ourselves the question of, when we think about it, because mindset shift is something huge that we're talking about, right? And really being able to, as individuals of color who have been taught to assimilate, to become a part of, to fit into the mold of what society looks like or praises, et cetera. Something I'm interested in hearing is like, there's a lot of mindset shift that has to happen. And I think that my background is in psychology. So I'm always like, how are we evolving and working on our mindsets, but really asking ourselves, I'd love to hear from you. What are some of the mindset shifts that you think individuals should have when it comes to actually being in the room? And I say this because as we're thinking about how do we either sync up and be able to find new opportunities, or once we do have those opportunities, what are some of the mindset shifts that individuals of color, specifically Black women, should make in regards to just being able to show up as their most authentic selves?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. And I go back and forth sometimes with myself also, especially as I find myself mentoring folks in corporate America. I'm in tech in particular, and so there's even fewer Black women there. And so we have to. I would be disingenuous if I did not say that there is a certain amount of assimilation that happens because environments are not necessarily set up for us, right? So in order for us to show up at work and to participate and, as an example, the high school that I went to was one of only, I think we had like 5 Black girls in our senior class. And so simple things like our school dances, they didn't play any music that we like. So why would we want to go? It's not set up for us. No one made us feel like, oh, because you're Black, you can't come, don't participate. But it wasn't set up for us an environment that we would enjoy ourselves. And though we had many friends of all races, that wasn't the issue. The issue is that environments are not set up for us. So we've got a couple of things that we can do. First of all, we need to accept the fact that environments are not set up for us.
Mm.
And the whole point of this talk is that dismantling barriers for Black women in leadership, it's on us. So
Yeah.
I'm not taking about what I'm going to say next. I don't want you all to think that I'm taking the onus for this off of organizations, because it is organizations' duty to make sure everyone feels like they belong. But the
Mm.
reality of that is that we all know that oftentimes that's not the case.
Mm.
And oftentimes, even with a lot of effort, we don't always feel like we belong. So there's a couple things that we have to do. First of all, I will tell you, when I walk in a room and I am the only Black woman in a boardroom, I feel a certain way. When I walk in that boardroom and there's just one other person that I can
Yeah.
make eye contact with and smile and be like, okay, there may be some battles in this room that I need to fight or help people understand, but I'm not by myself. So the
Mm.
number one thing for me is, like, as we grow and as we move, we got to bring folks with us. We
Yeah.
absolutely, we have to help to create and clear out barriers, because the one thing that I have noticed is as we move up in our careers, we do begin to get access to the folks that we didn't have access to before.
Mm.
And oftentimes, especially in this day and age, many of them are dependent on us. I'm like, what do I do right now?
Mm.
I want this room to look different, but what do I do?
Yeah.
Please take advantage of that. Please take advantage of this moment and time that these
Mm.
doors are open for us. We don't know how long it's going to last, right? I always tease that, last year, June 2020, it was like, as if Black folks just showed up, right? Like,
Mm.
we were this new commodity, and it's like, oh no, we've been here for like 600 years. But okay.
Mm.
And so that is likely going to begin to wear off, right?
Mm.
If we allow it. If we allow it. But if we use this time to position ourselves, if we use this time to help bring folks up, and we start building this into the culture, that's the only way this is going to last. We cannot depend on any organization. We cannot depend on anyone other
Mm.
than ourselves to make sure that the paths that we're clearing now or attempting to clear will be the ones that our nieces, our daughters, our granddaughters, our, or no relative to us, but just sisters coming behind us, that we've
Mhm.
been able to clear the path. We're in a very unique moment in time, and I think we have to definitely take advantage of this opportunity.
I love that. And Dionna, we just got a question in the chat that from Tammy. So Tammy asked, how are we truly changing the space if we continue to teach that assimilation is the only way to succeed? Also, are environments truly inclusive if they're requiring marginalized people to hide and manipulate who we are? Can I answer this really quickly before I pass it on
Please
to you?
do. Please do.
Okay, because I think something that's really important is, for context of what Dionna was sharing, she was saying that's what she learned back when she was in college at an HBCU, but really highlighting the fact that that has essentially changed now. And I think something that Dionna also just mentioned that's so important is the fact that we are in a place right now, or Black women are in a place right now, where we might be seen and or celebrated in ways that that has never happened. And so something that I think is so important is to show up as your most authentic self. And I think that that's something that might feel hard or difficult because we've been brought up to be a certain way, talk a certain way, act a certain way, not have emotions, always be strong, always have it together, etc. But I feel like we're at a time now where companies are trying their hardest to be as inclusive as possible. And so really showing up as you and not feeling like you have to fit the mold, because then what that will do is for the other women of color, the other Black women on the team, to be able to say, oh, wow, that's amazing. And there are things that you might not notice. Like I remember at PowerToFly or maybe like a month or so ago, a new Black woman had joined the team, and she was like, seeing you in our weekly org meeting, being a leader, just being your most authentic self really inspired me. And that's something that you would never think that someone would notice, because you're used to like everyone being like you, or used to just kind of like being what the room looks like. But
Yeah.
it's something that I also think is so important in regards to like the extra thought process of like representation, of having my face in a Zoom meeting can have a positive impact on someone else's experience, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I
Absolutely.
want to pass it over to you to hear a little bit about your
No,
thoughts on
you're absolutely right, Sienna. And thanks for clarifying that. Yeah, the point that I was making is that, we've been taught that, and particularly When I think about, like, I'm a Gen X, like right at the end, kind of beginning of millennials, like that's what I was taught. And I
Mhm.
feel that that's beginning to change. However, I will say that, folks still are sometimes taken aback by us and our authentic self, and we've got to be okay with that, right? You've got to be okay with that. Sometimes your opinion is not that it's not the most popular. Folks don't get it sometimes, right? So we have to be, I absolutely 100% agree to be our authentic self for sure. But the reality also is, and not but, and the reality, the reality is that uh, oftentimes Black, Latino, like our cultures, we have very distinct cultures, and I laugh at like my friends who are like, they're rolling into work and they have like this hardcore like rap on in their car, and then like they have to turn it off and they go in and like they're all buttoned up, right? Because
Yeah.
they're like at work. Or you have like your relaxed self,
Mhm.
with your friends and family, and then at work we feel like we have to be a certain way because that's the way we were taught. But one thing that was really interesting is I was talking to Catherine about this one day about how we code switch, right? I feel like Black and
Mm.
Latino folks in general, we code switch between work and when we're with our family and friends. And she mentioned to me like, yeah, I could definitely see. She's like, but I think I do the same thing. Like, I'm not the same when I'm with my friends and maybe having a drink and relaxing and just whatever than I am in like a professional environment. And I had never thought about it that way. But it's true. Like in general, there's certain things that we tend to incorporate change about maybe that we would do in our regular life. So I don't think that that part is so far off. But the more comfortable we become in who we are, um,
Mm.
the more knowledgeable we are, the more opportunity we have to like share that, the more comfortable I think from what I've seen, folks becoming comfortable being their authentic self.
Mm. I love that. I love that. And I was like, you're preaching to the choir. I was like, I'm loving this
I know.
conversation. So
I know.
in
I
the
know.
chat, people are saying that they definitely resonate with being the only person of color on their team or maybe in
Mm,
leadership, etc. And so we see you, literally. We can't literally see you, but we see
yep.
you and we hear you.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely.
so I want to talk a little bit about when we go back to the conversation of dismantling the barriers, it's on us. I would love to hear how can we, this is a two-part question kind of, right? So like if
Hmm.
we are currently a Black woman who's in a leadership position,
Hmm.
how can we support and champion for others outside of ways that we might just share, right? And so this can
Hmm.
be informal or formal, but I'd love to hear some of your thoughts around that.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat the question, Sienna? I
Yeah,
love
of
my
course.
headphones, but my phone does something, it clicks out. So sorry, one more time.
No worries. So as Black women already in leadership positions, right?
Hmm.
How can we support other Black women in the workplace to help them and kind of bring them up, like as we were saying before? And this can be either
Absolutely.
small things or big things as well that we haven't already mentioned.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and this is where, we talk about this is on us. This is what we're really talking about. So there's a couple things I think we can do. Earlier I mentioned, if you have other Black women on your team, making sure that they have the support that they need. But I want to be clear that that reaches way past out like your team, right? So at your company, folks at other companies that that are trying to move up and you have this experience. I think a couple of things that we do. One is I know mentoring, it can take a lot of time, and I know I've had times where if someone asked me to mentor them, and so I'm like, sure. And there have been times where I like have like way too many
Yeah.
folks that I'm trying to help than I actually can because of job, and I have a bunch of kiddos and all that stuff. So I think that if you are going to create a mentorship relationship, that you really commit yourself to that, and that
Mm,
you don't overcommit yourself when you have that initial conversation. You let people know, like, I would love to mentor you. Maybe we meet every 6 weeks or we meet every 2 months, but in the meantime, feel free to email me,
mm,
etc. I've found that, even when we have the best intentions, sometimes like, okay, let's talk weekly and we'll do this, and this. Then life gets in the way, it doesn't happen. And it's much better to consistently meet with someone once a month, etc., and stick to it. Because what you have to also realize is that person being mentoring, that mentee,
Mm,
um, is internalizing things that you don't even mean
mm,
to. So like by canceling the meetings,
yeah.
et cetera, because they clearly you're going to, if you ask someone to be a mentor, someone you look up to and someone that you think can help
Mm,
you grow. So I think mentoring is important, but again, be realistic about your time. It's also okay if someone asks you to be their mentor and you say, hey, like right now, I have all of these things going on, but I have an amazing woman that I think
mm,
would be a great mentor for you. Because there are some people that absolutely love this, especially those folks, like I said, maybe managers or
mm,
moving up to like a director level who have a heart for this. Connect people with other people, I think is absolutely fine also. And the biggest thing is, again, I'll keep repeating this, is making sure that you're giving people opportunities,
mm,
even if they're not on your team. When people are asking, for instance, when people reach out to me about jobs, right now, DEI
mm.
leaders, it's like the hottest job going around. So
Hottest thing in the
the
game
inbox,
right
oh
now.
my gosh, it's so funny what a difference a year makes. But if I'm not interested, I pass it on to one of my sisters and I'll tell that person, hey, I'm not looking right now, but this is an amazing person. You have any questions, let me know. And I connect them. These are the kind of things that help people grow. And also being candid with people. We talked about assimilation earlier, right? Part of that was, for a long time, I feel like Black folks that were in corporate America, we had to, we were a certain way around other Black people in corporate America also, because not wanting to come out of like this character is very interesting. Maybe you all aren't experiencing that very much now, but I would say be open to people. Let them know you're a real person.
Yeah.
Sometimes we put leaders on these pedestals and it becomes unattainable to us. And we think I could never do that. Just
Mm,
being a real person, being open, talking about the mistakes you made, what you struggle with. I think that that helps other Black women gain that confidence sometime. That like I share all the time, that I have 5 children,
mm,
and as Sienna, as you know, they range from 24 to 10 months. Like we
yeah.
never want to have an empty nest. I'm convinced, right? We just we've got every generation. So to be a career woman, and also I've always wanted to be a mother, always wanted to have a
Mm,
large family. And so that has been a struggle. I remember early in my career, I would not put my children's pictures on the desk in my
mm,
office because folks would assume if you have, a
mm,
child or more than one child that you couldn't do the thing. We need to make sure if we have people on our team or people that we know who are parents or have other things that are keeping their time or whatever, that we don't write them off, that we
yeah.
understand people are full people and they have lives, and that we're understanding about that and still continue to give them opportunities.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Dion, I really want to lean into something that you were saying. Well, you said so many things. I was like, if y'all are taking notes and watching this right now, I was like, I would have highlighted 3 to 4 different things that Diana just shared. But I really want to lean in on what you were sharing around like mentorship as one, and then also just bringing people up. And so the two things that I really want to lean in on is in regards to the emotional and mental well-being of Black women in the workplace. If you are a manager or a leader or just someone with
Mm,
impact and or authority in the company, like you being real about mental space or like breaks that they might
mm,
need is one of the biggest things that I think you can do. I remember back in January, I just had someone come on my team and they were living in DC, and she was dealing with a lot of stuff, and it wasn't
mm,
saying like, oh well, you just joined X, Y, and Z, but it was tapping in and was like, hey, like what do you need right now, right? Because knowing that pain or that trauma when you watch or like individuals who
yes,
look like being in danger,
yes.
that's hard. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Just imagine if we were labeled by like the worst moment in our life, right? Or
Mm,
if we were labeled by a time period in our life where things were just like out of control and that
mm,
set our tone like forever. It's awful. It's
yeah.
not realistic. I'm so happy that we are finding ourselves now in a space where, as Black folks, we're talking about mental health. We're
Mm,
talking about the need for rest, and that, vacation is not, taking time off is not a bad thing. I
yeah.
remember my mom. so proud when she was getting ready to retire. She had like 6 months of vacation left. I'm like, oh my God, like that was like a bad surprise. She never took time off. But the point is, you're absolutely right. And as a leader, recognizing that. One of the
Yeah.
things that we did at Thumbtack recently, again, as we were supporting our Asian American colleagues and leaders, was that we did a couple things. One, I sent a message to all of our managers and said, look, folks are struggling.
Yeah.
This is a hard time for people, and this is going to affect different people differently. Please like be aware of your employees and
Mm.
encourage them if they need time off to take care of themselves, share the resources we have here, etc. PTO, someone being off a day or two, a week, shoot, 2 weeks, is not going, like, if that refreshes them and they can come back and be ready to whatever. Let's look at the big picture here. And it doesn't
Yeah.
mean it's going to work in every situation, but one thing that I remember, and I remember this probably happened 15 years ago, and I still remember this. I was on a conference call, and we were talking about DEI, and I was definitely one of the younger people on the call, and there was all these leaders. I was just like, oh my God, like all these. This is when CDOs kind of first started coming out, and like folks that were directors level, and um, they were talking about a subject, and like I was trying to insert myself in the conversation or answer questions, and I couldn't get in because I mean these are very strong personalities, etc.
Mm.
And I remember there was a woman on the call who said, "Wait, stop, hold on, Dionna, were you trying to say something?" And I was
Mm.
like, "Oh, yeah, like yeah, it was." And she was
Yeah.
like, I'm sorry, you're being down. She was like, but let's make space for her to share what she's thinking. Do you understand 15 years later, I still think about that and thank that Black woman who paused and made space for me so that my voice could be heard? That's something that's would be considered small, but could make a world of difference for someone who, again, just doesn't have either the same confidence, authority,
Yeah.
experience as you, holding space for people.
That's huge. That's huge. And looping together holding space and what we were talking about regarding mentorship, Erin asked in the chat, she asked, what if you are that person that is needing the support, right? So
Mhm.
should you reach out to potential mentors or Black women in leadership in your company or at a company that you're applying to?
So that's a great question. I'm going to tell you my personal philosophy about asking out mentoring. This does not mean that it is like a definite, the only way to do it. I personally think that you should build relationships with folks before you ask them to mentor you.
Yeah.
I don't think sending a cold email or cold LinkedIn because you see someone is in a role and being like, hey, can you be my mentor?
Mhm.
I think that you owe it to that person to take the time to have also invested in like a relationship with them, right? So that they get to know you, so that if their time is crazy, when people know you, they're gonna, they'll work a little harder to make space, et cetera. And also, I've seen some people really get shattered because they asked someone to be a mentor that they didn't know, and they either didn't respond or they couldn't do it, et cetera. And not to take that personally, right? Because sometimes folks are getting a lot of inquiries, et cetera. But in my personal opinion, is I wouldn't just cold like ask someone, but what I
Mhm.
would do is reach out to someone that I know. It could be someone at my company, could be someone somewhere else. And even if they aren't, someone alumni at your school, like find a reason, something that maybe you have in common, and begin corresponding or having a relationship before you just jump into, can you be my mentor? Because if someone is doing a good job mentoring, it does take time. And so you need to do your part too, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I love that. And I just want to weigh in really quickly. Like, if we take that a step back and share what Dionna was talking about, like, even when you reach out, I really want to encourage y'all to reach out with intention because something
Mhm.
that happens so often is just like sending a LinkedIn message being like, hey, my name is so and so from so and so. Do we have 15 minutes to chat? And like the first thing that I do, which is like trying to pour in, but saying like, hey, thanks so much for reaching out. I'd love to know a little bit more context about what you'd like to chat about, what you're interested in, et cetera, to use it as a learning opportunity of realizing what you were just saying, Dionna, like, if people are going through 100 emails a day and yours pops up, what's going to make them want to be intrigued, want to get to know you? And like, so maybe it's just starting off with a quick 30-minute conversation, but positioning yourself as like, I'd love to learn from you. And also here's a little bit of context about me, because just reading your name and your job description or what you're doing right now, that's not enough information in like the 0.5 seconds that we have to make a decision of, am I interested or am I not? So really be intentional when reaching out to people.
Absolutely. I think that that is absolutely true. And I also think, again, ease into it. It's always, it's kind of like, what they say about dating, like, go on a few dates first before you ask the person, propose to the person, right? Like, get to know them, get some time. I also just, if someone has just started a new role, it's probably not the best time. You can use that time to get to know them, etc. And also remember, like, if you're asking someone to be a mentor for you, that they may not, right? Don't take it personally. Don't stop there. Don't think that that means I'm not worthy of whatever. Again, like I started several years ago just assuming positive intent, and it has changed like my outlook about so many things. Even sometime when I'm wrong, it wasn't positive intent. Like I assumed in my brain, and it just makes me react a different way. So know that. I also want to just take 1 second to distinguish the difference between a mentor and a sponsor. I feel like in an organization, for you to be able to move up and to have someone, as I started with, speaking up for you, speaking on your behalf, that's a sponsor. Someone who is going to sponsor you may not necessarily have a time to mentor you. They may not be giving, meeting with you regularly, etc. But they are someone that, again, you're making sure that they see the work that you're doing, that they know where you want to go and what you want to do. And that's the person that's going to speak up for you in meeting. People aren't going to do that for people that they haven't seen their work or haven't heard great things about, right? And so you want to be sure, again, that you have an opportunity you need to give people a reason to do that. Don't just assume because I'm a Black woman, because I'm anybody, that someone owes me that they're going to whatever. No, let them know, let them be confident in the work that you do. And at that point, we know that the real reason that maybe you haven't moved is because your name hasn't been put out there, and folks will usually step in the gap for you.
Yeah, I love that. And just to kind of loop this back into something that we had got in the chat before, Dionna, what you were just sharing as a sponsor, would you also, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like, would you also consider that an advocate, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Oh, perfect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And so when I use the term sponsor, people advocate, it's usually someone who is in leadership or at an executive level who can bring you up in meetings that you're not in, and so I think that that is super important.
Yeah, champions. I love it. Okay, so Vanetta Green just said networking with intention leads to retention. Love that.
Absolutely.
Like that should be a tagline for something. Yes. And Judy just said, relationships are very important. How do we as Black women find out about the quote unquote hidden executive job market? Black women add value to the workplace. Imagine what we can do leading the organization.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Sienna. If you want to.
No, go ahead. I want to answer first.
So I absolutely agree with this. I always tell people, and again, not necessarily a popular opinion, but it just is what it is. People promote people that they like. People promote people that they're comfortable with. People promote people that they feel they're going to be able to easily work with. This is why, unfortunately, sometimes we see people choosing people like them, right? Because that's an easy transition. I can manage them. It's going to be easier, etc. So that being said, that's just part of the reason why it's so important for us to establish these relationships. Really early in my career, I read a book called Career Warfare. This book, it's a little hardcore, so it's not for everyone, but the gist of it was, you move up in organizations by the relationships you build. You can be the best gadget maker in the factory, the fastest, yours have, you don't have less errors, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But folks around you don't like your attitude. Your manager feels like you're unapproachable. Senior leadership, may like it because of the numbers, but they're like, just keep him there making gadgets. That's what he's good at. If you are good at what you do, and you also have the ability to build relationships. Because the thing you have to remember, I don't think it's the perfect world, because we know we're outside of this, so it does make it difficult. But I will say, part of being a senior leader in your company is about building relationships. Once you become a leader, you become almost a spokesperson, right, for your organization, for your department, and you do need to have that skill set. So I 100% agree with Judy. Relationships are super important. The second part of her question is like, how do we find out about the hidden executive job market? You've got to build, you've got to build If we're talking about the hidden job market, that's going to come from folks that you know who have stuff. So I don't know that we should depend so much on the hidden job market, to be honest, because oftentimes we are not a part of that, unless, there's organizations like the Executive Leadership Council, right, which is made up of Black executives across the US. And so they're super connected folks, right? And so you could still be a part of something like that, and still kind of have the in. But what I do think that we do is that if we see a job out there, and again, we don't meet 100% of what they're asking for, we're less likely to apply. If we have an opening in our workplace, and we have most of the skill set, but maybe not everything, my white male counterparts are like, you want a CFO? I mean, I just been an accountant for 2 years, but hey, I'm going to apply, right? Whereas we could have 15 years, have our CPA, have all this whatever, but they ask for 50. So let's say we have 10 years of experience. They ask for 15 years. We're like, well, I'm not going to apply because it asked for 15 years. We've got to break away from that. I have found that companies are starting to change that. But again, we can't wait on companies to change. So for us, when we find opportunities, step out there, put yourself out there, apply for things maybe that you may not feel like you're 100%, ready for. But I just think that I don't think we can depend on the hidden executive job market, because we are still pretty shut out of that. The only way you'll find out about hidden executive roles is that if you've built relationships with executives that want to share it with you.
I love this. And like the one thing that I would add to that is learning how to communicate what you do with clarity and confidence. And I think that that's something that is so big, because a lot of the times it's like Kendrick Lamar just came to my mind of like, be humble, right? And like there's a healthy balance of being humble and not feeling like you're bragging, but also being able to say, hold on, but this is all that I know that I can do, and learning how to like practice that more, so it doesn't feel like you're preparing for, I mean, you should prepare for performance reviews, right? But like being able to say, like, I know how to position my past experience for what this new position is, instead of getting caught up in, I've had my career in X, Y, or Z for X amount of years, like never change or never transition,
Exactly. And think about yourself in the sense of, I mean, career-wise, the competencies you have, right? So like, these are the things that I do really, really well. For instance, organizational skills and like project management skills, those are certainly cross over into several different roles. But I do think, there's a couple things and so my career, Sienna, is, like, I started off in recruiting, and then moved in recruiting to like HR business partner, and then into the DI space. I learned so much over those years of being a recruiter about, how hiring managers hire, who applies for roles, et cetera. And there's a couple of things that like really stood out for me over my time there. One is, like I said, apply. You have no idea how just making general effort, so many people in the world are, I hate this word, lazy, but so lazy is probably not the right word, but like, I see something, I like it, but am I going to act on it? Tons of people don't act on it. You have to know that, like, if I'm going to make this happen, I've got to be that outlier, right? Let me act on this. Roles that we assume hundreds of people have applied for, you might not have, but you need to make sure that if your name's not in the hat, it's not going to happen, right? You've got to go that extra mile. resumes. Look at the job that you're applying for and make sure that your resume speaks to the things that they are looking for. It might seem like common sense, but most folks have one resume, but they're looking to like go into a different role, etc. Look at the job description. Look at if they're looking for organizational development and project management, highlight those things in your other career, in your other positions. We've got to take the time to do the extra steps to make ourselves stand out if we're like cold, applying for jobs, etc.
Yeah. I love this. And like one additional thing, I was like, I feel like we could create a course right now just around this conversation. But I was going to say, in addition to what you were sharing, Dionna, something else that I would share with all of you who are watching right now is also going back to the networking conversation that we had. When it does come time to apply for jobs, instead of like cold emailing to team at whatever company, do your work on LinkedIn to be able to see what roles do they already have, who's on their team, who can you connect with on their team? Because again, as we're talking about these conversations like the hidden executive job market, or if we're talking about how do we get ourselves in the room, sometimes it's maybe not applying with a general email, but saying like, how can I connect or get on a short phone call, again, reaching out with intention with someone who works at the company to be able to hear what it's like, hear who I should speak to, and maybe that's getting you your foot in the door a little bit faster instead of just doing the typical job process.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Number one, I just want to say we're not done yet, but I'm super grateful and I'm loving this conversation. And so if any of you who are watching have any additional questions, definitely feel free to send them in to us and we'll try to answer in the last 5 to 7 minutes. And we got another question around building relationships. And so the question is, how do you build relationships in fields that are heavily dominated by white males who may lack understanding of your role without compromising your values? Essentially, how do you build relationships that are heavily dominated by white males?
Yeah, I think that sure, please. No,
sorry.
Go. No, go.
Really quickly, something that I want us to have crystal clear in this conversation, like as we are talking about dismantling the barriers faced by Black women, as we are talking about bringing each other up, etc. I don't want there to be a thought process of like, this can only happen in these circles, and so when we talk about having fields that are heavily dominated by white men, like there are also some really dope white male allies out there, you know what I mean? And so yeah, with that was just a side note, but with that, I want to pass it over to you, Dionna, to answer the question.
That's exactly what I was going to say. What I was going to say is, pivotal movement in my career have been championed mostly by white men. And so, again, these are folks that understand that how to be a sponsor, that gave me opportunities, et cetera. And so I do think that it's important for us to realize, like, if you're looking at like, how do I identify the white men who are like wannabe allies, et cetera? There's a couple things. One is if you're in a larger corporation and you have employee resource groups, they typically have like an executive sponsor or a person in leadership who's sponsoring that ERG group. Those tend to be folks that care about this, right? That's a great place for you to kind of find resources there. Also, I think, if you're on LinkedIn and you notice, folks that are posting things that are really focused on mentorship and allyship, that's a great indication also. Also, like we're all human beings, right? There are plenty of like white men that I have, things in common with, that I chat with, et cetera. And so those are the folks that I've like maybe have something else in common with that we can connect on. And so I don't, I know sometimes we feel like we're on the outs. We may not have as much in common. I don't think that we have the time to focus on those. We gotta move when we need to move. I tell people all the time, and I know we're getting ready to run out of time, and I want to leave you all with a couple things. So for Black women, I want to tell you this, first of all, is just to know your worth, to know the resilience that that we have to know that we do belong. Our voice needs to be heard. Know that we make companies more profitable when we help lead or when we are leaders. Know this. Don't think maybe. Don't feel like you, now, your company may not realize this as much. Your boss may not realize it. That's their problem. You've got to find spaces that allow you to thrive. I have been in companies where I felt I was not valued, I was overlooked, my role wasn't. And then I go to another company who listens and feels like I'm the best thing since, whatever. You've got to find places that you can go where you're embraced. Being a Black person in America, we have to deal with things on a regular basis. We don't want to have to fight that fight every meeting we're at, every whatever. Find a place that feels safe for you where you can thrive. And allies, we need you. Speak up, make space. Black women, we are also allies for other Black women who have less experience, who are looking to connect. So we need to all, do our part. But most of all, for Black women, I feel like we've taken a lot, we've dealt with a lot, and we need to know that we belong. We need to know we are brilliant, we are amazing, and that we are needed in this space. So we keep fighting because we're needed to be here, and we have a lot to give the world.
Whew, I was like, I have chills. I'm ready to rock the rest of the day. No, I honestly and truthfully do want to say thank you, Dionna, for number one, being the first voice that we're highlighting in our Elevating Black Women Summit this week. It's amazing. And it's also an honor for me, if I'm being real and sharing with all of y'all, like Dionna, without you, I was like, I don't know if I would be where I am right now. Amazing. So it's definitely what you were sharing of like pulling other people up. And so thank you for your time, for your knowledge, for everything. And for those of you who are in the audience right now, thank you all for tuning in. And so thanks, Dionna. We appreciate you.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you for all of you that took the time today. Please feel free to connect on LinkedIn. And I am looking forward to seeing you all grow in your career. And again, thank you for your time.